Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and explore a seriously fascinating high-stakes scenario. How exactly do massive, multi-billion-dollar international construction contracts survive when they're suddenly plunged into an active war zone? We're looking at the ultimate intersection of meticulous legal frameworks and, well, unpredictable real-world chaos. It's a situation where project managers and engineers have to navigate both literally exploding supply chains and incredibly strict contractual deadlines.
So, what actually happens to your contract when a war breaks out? It's the ultimate stress test for any major project, right? Answering this requires us to look past all the dramatic headlines and decode the remarkably strict rules of international contracts. Specifically, we're unpacking the FIDIC Red Book, pretty much the undisputed gold standard for global construction, to really understand the precise legal mechanics that kick into gear when the truly unthinkable happens on a job site.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at redefining force majeure. Then, the strict prevention threshold. Third, the 2026 crucible. Fourth, the essential rules of engagement. And finally, termination and local laws. Let's get into it. All right, starting with Section 1, redefining force majeure and the paradigm shift we've seen. Let's start with the rulebook itself, because to understand the modern contract landscape, we really have to look at how the terminology has evolved. Earlier FIDIC editions, like the 1999 and 2007 versions, addressed these crises under Clause 19 using the traditional term force majeure. But then, in the 2017 edition, the drafters entirely replaced this with exceptional events and shifted it over to Clause 18. This was a massive paradigm shift. It was a deliberate move to detach the contract from the strict historical baggage of civil law systems. The goal? Creating a more universally applicable, modern standard that could cross borders without getting bogged down in centuries-old local legal definitions. Now, to actually qualify as an exceptional event today, the disruption has to hit some very specific marks. It must be entirely beyond your control, and you must be unable to reasonably avoid or overcome it. But the major pivot here, and this is huge, is the complete absence of a strict foreseeability test. The focus has entirely shifted away from what you could have reasonably predicted on the day you signed the contract to what is genuinely beyond your control right now. It's basically acknowledging that in modern global infrastructure, anticipating every single geopolitical tremor is functionally impossible. However, while removing that strict foreseeability test definitely provides modern flexibility, it also opens the door to a whole lot of uncertainty. As this quote points out, disputes inevitably pop up over whether you, as the contractor or the employer, should have better anticipated or mitigated the risk during your initial project planning. Think about it. If you're building a power plant in a historically volatile region, the employer might totally argue you should have priced in a localized disruption. It creates this incredibly delicate, high-stakes balancing act of risk allocation when tens of millions of dollars are on the line and absolutely nobody wants to be left holding the bag. Moving on to Section 2, the strict prevention threshold, or as we like to call it, hardship versus impossibility. The absolutely crucial point here is understanding the incredibly high bar required to actually get relief. A lot of folks assume these clauses are just a catch-all safety net for any major disruption. Well, they aren't. Imagine you're the lead contractor. If you're facing mere financial strain, soaring material costs, or just broader market inconvenience, FIDIC offers absolutely zero sympathy. To get relief, you need to prove absolute prevention of your contractual obligations. You basically have to be physically or legally blocked from doing the work. Honestly, if you take away anything from the first half of this explainer, let it be this exact definition. The doctrine of prevention requires true impossibility. Think of it this way. If a geopolitical event causes your labor costs to double and your supply lines to completely reroute, just crushing your cash flow, that's a commercial imbalance. You are bleeding money, sure, but you can still physically build. Under the strict FIDIC framework, economic hardship alone simply does not qualify as an exceptional event. A bulldozer that is too expensive to run is a commercial problem. A bulldozer blocked by a military checkpoint is prevention. The physical work must genuinely be stopped dead in its tracks. All right, Section 3, the 2026 crucible, focusing on the Middle East crisis. Now let's take these strict rules and apply them to a live, incredibly high-stakes scenario. Over February and March 2026, the Middle East saw a sudden, massive escalation in geopolitical tension, and the panic on project sites was palpable. First, multiple sites were directly impacted by targeted drone strikes. Then, major hubs like the port of Fujairah officially declared force majeure, instantly severing vital material supplies.
On top of all that, airspace closures and totally unprecedented shipping delays in the Strait of Hormuz paralyzed the movement of key personnel. This wasn't abstract legal theory anymore. This was a live, intense demonstration of contract limits being tested in real time under extreme duress. But here is the harsh reality. Even amidst a multi-state geopolitical crisis, relief is never automatic. If you're a contractor on the ground, just pointing at the news or citing regional evacuation orders won't save you. General market disruption just doesn't satisfy the requirements of these clauses. You are required to prove that your specific, day-to-day performance on your exact site was genuinely prevented. The burden of proof is entirely on your shoulders, and the engineer reviewing your claim, they're going to be looking at your specific site boundaries, not the broader regional map.
That brings us to Section 4, Essential Rules of Engagement, how to handle survival and mitigation. So how do project teams actually survive this kind of chaos? Well, contract management suddenly becomes just as critical as your engineering. The sources lay out a pretty clear survival guide. First, you absolutely must issue immediate, precise written notices detailing the exact impacts under the relevant clause, whether that's 19.1 or Clause 18. Vague or late notices will completely invalidate your claim, even if there is literally a war outside your window. Second, you have to back those notices up with meticulous documentation. You need an undeniable paper trail directly linking specific military directives, port closures, or airspace bans directly to your physical work stoppages.
Furthermore, you can't just send a notice and sit back in your trailer. Mitigation is absolutely mandatory under these contracts. And here's where it gets incredibly strict and, honestly, almost darkly comical. Your job site might be closed by a missile strike, but FIDIC still expects you to file your paperwork and optimize operations. Even under severe security risks and airspace lockdowns, adjudicators fully expect to see logs proving you explored alternative procurement, tried rerouting materials through safer borders, or even adjusted shift patterns. You have to prove you tried absolutely everything to keep the project breathing before throwing in the towel.
You also have to remember that your contract doesn't exist in a vacuum. During the March 2026 conflict, major materials suppliers were independently declaring force majeure on their own subcontracts. This creates a massive, complex ripple effect. And as a main contractor, you're caught right in the middle. You must carefully assess those downstream exposures, ensure your own contractual coverage is watertight, and meticulously weave your subcontractor's documentation into your primary claims to the employer. Basically, if your concrete supplier stops delivering, you have to prove exactly why you couldn't just go buy concrete from someone else.
And finally, Section 5, termination and local laws, which really are the final resort.
But what if you simply can't mitigate? When a conflict drags on and a project is just bleeding cash, we have to look to the final resort. Under the FIDIC framework, strict termination rights can be triggered if an exceptional event prevents the execution of substantially all works for a continuous, unbroken period of 84 days. That means the entire critical path of the project must be absolutely paralyzed for 12 solid weeks before you can legally walk away without facing a penalty.
Alternatively, those exact same termination rights apply if the prevention spans multiple, non-continuous periods that add up to exceed 140 days in total. Now, while these numbers do provide a necessary level of contractual certainty, critics in the industry argue they are brutally long. Just think about the overhead costs of maintaining a stalled megaproject. In a modern crisis, waiting 140 days often means the project becomes totally commercially unviable, and companies go bankrupt long before that legal termination threshold is actually reached. This brings us to a really fascinating legal intersection. If you find yourself trapped by FIDIC's incredibly strict threshold, meaning you're bleeding cash but not quite hitting that 84-day mark of absolute physical prevention, local laws might actually be your only lifeline. In jurisdictions like the UAE and Qatar, local commercial codes may recognize broader concepts of economic hardship or impossibility. These local civil codes might actually force a renegotiation or grant equitable relief, even when the strict FIDIC clauses refuse to acknowledge your excessive burden. So, blending local legal strategy with your contract administration is absolutely non-negotiable in these regions. Ultimately, the 2026 crisis serves as a stark reminder. In modern, globalized construction, having exceptional geopolitical awareness and a sharp legal strategy is just as critical as your engineering expertise. When systemic risks hit, the way stakeholders document, mitigate, and legally maneuver leaves a permanent mark on the industry. It really leaves us with one critical question to ponder. As global uncertainties inevitably continue to rise, how will your response to today's extreme stress tests permanently rewrite the risk management standards of tomorrow?
Okay,